Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar today to be put on by BMS, our CAOT insurance brokers. And I'd like to introduce Tara Scullion and Ashley Clifford, who will be leading the presentation. Go ahead, Tara. It's all over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Randy. And thank you all for joining us today and taking time out of your Thursday. Ashley and I will try to make today as engaging as possible and try to make insurance super fun for you all. But today we're going to be looking at how you can protect your practice as an occupational therapist through the CAOT Professional Liability Insurance Program. So like Randy said, my name is Tara Scullion and I'm joined by my colleague Ashley, and we are both registered insurance brokers with BMS, and we are the insurance broker for the CAOT professional liability policy. So before we jump kind of right into today's content, we wanted to provide just a bit of background on BMS, kind of who we are and what we do. So we're a bit of a specialty brokerage in that we work primarily with associations to deliver really specialist coverage and risk management resources to over 700,000 professionals across Canada. And the way that's done is through about 70 or so different national and provincial associations, just like CAOT. So our team's located in Ottawa, Ontario. We're actually in the background of that photo, in the faded out background. That's our team in Ottawa. We're located at the Lansdowne location, which is incredible. We get a good view of the field. And yeah, our team is there to assist you with any questions that you may have. So we have a dedicated phone line and an email address, which we'll ensure to share at the end of today's session. So if you have any questions while we're going through the slides, feel free to pop them in the chat. Ashley and I will try to get to as many of them after the presentation, but if we're not able to get to one of your questions or you think of something after the fact, please feel free to give us a call. Our team is more than happy to help. Perfect. So the CAOT insurance program now represents over 7,000 participating members, which is incredible. We've been the proud partner of CAOT now for I think almost 10 years, and it's incredible just to see how the program has grown. There's many benefits of being part of a group program like this through your association. So things like access to really specialized support, including for claims and for kind of pro bono legal assistance. So as the broker, we're there to support you throughout the claims process. If you are ever involved in a circumstance where you have a claim or a complaint, and Ashley will go through kind of the steps to take if that happens. And then you also have access to a pro bono legal advice line through the law firm Gowlings. So Gowlings has offices nationally, across Canada, and they're really specialized in managing and handling malpractice claims for healthcare professionals. And Ashley will go through in a bit more detail what that pro bono legal advice line is, and we'll make sure to give you the contact details for them as well. So today we are going to take a look and spend the most of our time on that professional liability insurance product that you have access to as a CAOT member, and how it's there to basically offset some of the risks that you face as an occupational therapist. We'll go through a number of claims examples and case studies with you today, to try to help kind of relate that coverage available to you to real life practice circumstances. We'll also go through a number of coverage highlights. Good to know if you're already insured with us. It's good to know what you have as a policyholder, or if perhaps you're looking at coverage that could be available to you through a variety of different channels. For instance, through your employer. We know some OTs may work in a province where they are relying on a hospital's policy, for instance. So we'll go through some key considerations to take if you are relying on an employer's policy versus carrying your own. And then we'll spend just a bit of time at the end of today's session just going through some of the other products that you have access to as a CAOT member, particularly if you're working in private practice. For instance, if you're an independent contractor, or maybe you have your own sole proprietorship or a business owner, there's things to consider beyond the professional liability insurance product, and we'll go through that today as well. Perfect. So we'll get right into the kind of meat of the presentation, and look at what professional liability insurance is. So this professional liability insurance is the primary product, I would say, purchased by CAOT members. The reason for that is there's often regulatory requirements by your college to carry professional liability insurance in order to practice. And the insurance through the CAOT program meets and exceeds all of those regulatory requirements. So again, another benefit of being part of a group program like this through your association is, since we work nationally, we work and make sure that the policy meets all the regulatory requirements across the provinces. And things change. Colleges could evolve and change those requirements. Scopes of practice may change, and we would ensure that the policy would evolve with those changes to make sure that the policy continues to meet those regulatory requirements. So what exactly is professional liability insurance, and why is it so important? The reason why it's important is because as a professional, you could be found legally responsible for acts, errors, and negligence associated with the services that you deliver as an OT. So if someone alleges that the advice or the services that you've provided have caused them some sort of injury that they're now seeking damages for, you could be found legally liable for that and be required to provide some sort of financial compensation to that injured individual. And what a professional liability policy is designed to cover is your legal defense costs. So for you to be able to hire a lawyer, it would pay for those legal fees throughout the lifetime of a claim, as well as provide any sort of financial compensation that could potentially be awarded to that injured individual. So like I mentioned, we'll go through a number of case studies with you today. And for the purpose of today's session, we'll break down the types of claims into 3 different categories. So the first type of claim that we'll look at are what we would call professional liability or malpractice claims. This is probably the claim that comes to mind most often when you're thinking about professional liability insurance. So this would be if a client were to hire their own lawyer and serve you with a statement of claim alleging that the services that you've provided have caused them some sort of injury that they are seeking damages for. And what the CAOT professional liability policy would cover is, again, those legal defense costs. So for you to be able to hire a lawyer and defend yourself against those allegations, as well as pay out any sort of damages or patient compensation. Just a few kind of policy details. The limits of the policy are 6 million per claim, up to 6 million per year. So what that means is, let's say you have one claim and it costs $1 million, you would still have $5 million remaining for the rest of the term. The professional liability insurance is administered by CAOT. So when you go to renew your membership or purchase your membership, you'll see there's the option to purchase the insurance. And there's also the option to buy up to a $10 million limit per claim and per year. The policy also provides coverage for your full scope of practice as defined by your regulatory body. So this means it's not restricted to your place of work. So we know it's not uncommon for OTs to work out of multiple clinic locations or hospitals, and you want to make sure you have a professional liability policy that would follow you across those different locations, which the CAOT professional liability policy does do. It also provides coverage, the coverage territory is worldwide, meaning you can deliver your services outside of Canada. It's important to note, though, that you would need to be operating within your regulatory scope of practice, both where you're located in and also where your client is located in. And it would defend against claims that are brought forward in Canada. We always suggest, if you are providing services out of Canada, please give our team a call and we're happy to go through the specifics of the policy. I know everyone's circumstance is unique, so our team of brokers is always there to assist. Perfect. So we'll go through a quick example of a malpractice claim. So you can see in this case study, an OT was providing therapy for a 65-year-old client who was recovering from a hip replacement. The OT designed a treatment plan to improve the client's mobility, which included balance and ambulation exercises. During one of those sessions, the OT asked the client to perform a standing exercise without adequate supervision or support, even though the client's recent assessment indicated she was at high risk of falls. While performing the exercise, the client lost her balance and fell, and sustained a fracture to her other hip. So the client filed a civil claim against the OT alleging negligence. So what a professional liability policy would cover in this circumstance is those legal defense costs. So for this OT in this example, to be able to hire their own attorney and defend themselves against the allegations, as well as pay out any sort of settlement costs that could be awarded. So perhaps the client is alleging that she had to take time off work, so she's claiming for her loss of income because of the hip fracture. Perhaps she had to hire additional medical support after the fracture, and all of this the OT could be legally responsible to pay according to the courts, and that's something that the OT can submit under the CAOT professional liability policy. So we've gone through those kind of malpractice claims, and then we also will talk about two other types of claims. So there's what we call regulatory legal expense claims. So this would be essentially college complaints. So where the occupational therapist is required to respond to a complaint or an investigation from their profession-specific kind of regulatory body. So things like unprofessional behavior, biased or discriminatory treatment, failure to obtain informed consent. There's a wide variety of reasons why an OT could perhaps be in a circumstance where they need to defend themselves against a college complaint, and we'll go through some examples of those as well. And then the last type of claim that we'll look at today, relatively uncommon, but did just want to touch on them briefly, are what we would call criminal claims. And that's where the occupational therapist is actually charged with a criminal offense related to their professional practice. And we'll go through an example of that as well. So for those regulatory legal expense claims, they are the most common type of claim that we see. So we wanted to spend a bit more time on that today. As an occupational therapist, you are regulated, and that means you're governed by a regulatory body that oversees your professional behavior. So your provincial college would have standards of practice, codes of ethics, bylaws that you as a registrant would need to abide to in order to call yourself an OT in that province. And this is an area where a member of the public can make a complaint against an OT for their services. It's not necessarily just the client that can make a college complaint against an OT. It can be a family member or a friend of the client. It could be a colleague, someone you work with, a former employer. And you could find yourself in a circumstance where you need to defend yourself against the allegations that have been made against you. When there is a college complaint, there's a variety of different outcomes that can happen. So the college could decide to dismiss the complaint based off of the nature of the allegations, or they could refer it to an investigation and it could go to a disciplinary hearing. And the college could perhaps impose kind of restrictions and limitations on the OT's practice. So if you are ever in a circumstance where you receive a notification from your college that there has been a complaint, you will know they will send you typically it via email or perhaps in the mail, indicating that so-and-so has made a complaint against you. In that circumstance, you have the right and you're encouraged to seek legal counsel for that. So you could utilize the CAOT professional liability policy to hire a lawyer and assist with your initial response back to the college. The lawyer would sit down with you and help draft that response, as well as provide you with representation if it did go to a disciplinary hearing, for instance. So Ashley will go through kind of the steps to take if you ever have a claim, but really important to report these types of claims under your policy because you do have support and assistance for those circumstances. So here's a quick example of a regulatory legal expense claim. So in this circumstance, an OT was reviewed by the Ministry of Health for their record keeping and billing practices. After the review, it was discovered that the OT had not been keeping proper records and had been improperly billing clients. The Ministry of Health reported this to the college, who launched an investigation into the matter. And the OT was found to be in violation of several regulations and standards related to record keeping. So if you are involved in a circumstance like this, the policy is there to provide coverage for you to be able to hire a lawyer and assist with the defense of the allegations. So the limits of your policy are on the screen there, depending on the limit option that you purchase. So again, you either can purchase that base option through CAOT, or there's the option to buy up. In this example here, a client's spouse made a complaint to the OT's provincial college following a home bathroom assessment for assistive equipment. The spouse alleged that the equipment provided was not appropriate, and the client did not have the capacity to consent. So in both of these examples, actually, it's a good example to show that it's not always just the client that's making a complaint against an OT to their college. The last example, it was the Ministry of Health. This example, it's the client's spouse. So you want to ensure that you have a professional liability policy that would provide you with kind of support and defense in those circumstances. So before I pass it off to Ashley, we'll go through the last type of example for those criminal claims. Again, relatively uncommon, but did want to touch on it briefly. And that would be if so in this example, sorry, a client accused an OT of inappropriate touching during a therapy session. The client contacts the police to have criminal charges brought against the OT. So there is criminal defense cost reimbursement for these types of claims under the policy, but an important item to note is that in order for the policy to respond, a not guilty verdict would need to be reached. So in those other two examples that we talked about, the professional liability and the college complaints, the OT would not be out of pocket for any of the expenses. They would submit a claim under their policy, and the insurance company would deal with the lawyer directly in terms of payment. For criminal claims, and the OT would hire their own lawyer, pay that lawyer, and once the not guilty verdict is reached, they would then submit their receipts to the insurance company for reimbursement. And again, the limits are on your slide there and are different depending on which option you select. Perfect. So last slide I promised for me before I pass it off to Ashley. This is just a really quick graph to show you the types of claims that we see under the CAOT program. So you can see the vast majority are those college complaints, which is that dark blue coloring versus the malpractice claims. Not uncommon. When you think about it, a member of the public, if they want to make a complaint against a professional to their college, there's really no barriers for them to do so. They don't need to hire and pay for their own lawyer, versus when they have if they wanted to sue an OT, they would need to do so. They would need to pay a lawyer to do that. So again, wanted to just give a brief overview of those types of claims. So I'll pass it off to Ashley to just go through a really high level policy comparison for you, just so you can see what the CAOT policy does cover.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you all. My name is Ashley. I'm one of the senior brokers here at BMS. I'm sure I've maybe spoken to a few of you at times, so it's very nice to meet you all. So we've had a chance to review, what is professional liability and some of the common types of claims that we see under the policy. It's important to understand the key considerations and elements of your CAOT policy because these elements are not guaranteed in other professional liability policies. So through the CAOT policy, the professional liability has two limits that you can choose from. So as Tara mentioned earlier, you can choose from a 6 million limit per claim per year, or you can also choose to upgrade that to a 10 million limit per claim per year. So we do offer those flexible limit options depending on your level of comfort with that limit and what you'd prefer. It also does include your full scope of practice as outlined by your regulatory body. The coverage territory is worldwide. So if you did happen to offer services outside of Canada, that is included within the policy. Claims must be reported in Canada in order for the coverage to respond. But if you're asked to perhaps consult with a patient that is outside of Canada, as long as you're following those rules and regulations in your province, as well as where the patient is located, then the coverage is designed to protect you. It's also not limited to your place of work. So if you are someone who does work at multiple different employment sites, perhaps you're working at a hospital a few days a week, and then perhaps you're working at a private practice the other days of the week, it's important to note that this coverage would follow you. You would be the named insured. So it's not limited to your one place of employment, for example. You wouldn't be required to have multiple policies. This one coverage would follow you. Some additional coverages that are included, super important, that regulatory legal expense. Tara highlighted the importance of this coverage because it is the most common type of claim that we do see, are those complaints made to the college. So it's imperative to ensure your policy does include this element of coverage. There's also that criminal defense cost reimbursement, not as common, but is important to ensure it's included within your policy. It's also important to note that there is no retroactive date under the CAOT professional liability policy. So that retroactive date is key because that's essentially as far back as the policy will go. So we will be going over some examples as to why this is important. So there is no retroactive date under the CAOT policy. So essentially our coverage would go as far back as needed. There's also extended reporting period coverage included for 7 years. So again, we will be going over this in a few slides, but the extended reporting period coverage is important for those who plan to cease practice. So that could be perhaps you're going into retirement, taking a sabbatical, whatever that looks like. You have coverage for up to 7 years. So that's going to extend your last active policy. So if your policy expires today, for example, you would have 7 years as long as you've completely ceased practice. There is also no deductible, which is important to note. So there would be nothing deducted, nothing that you would need to pay out unless it's that criminal defense type of claim, of course, but no deductible under the CAOT policy. A few other key components of your policy, the pro bono legal hotline, which we'll be going over shortly. You do have that specialist broker support. So I'm one of the brokers here who you may have been chatting with, but we have that dedicated CAOT phone number and email. So if you ever have any questions whatsoever, you want to schedule a time to connect, we're happy to do so. And we will be sharing those details at the end of the presentation. And then lastly, of course, you are CAOT Association endorsed. So you do have that, that advocacy there, the resources there through CAOT, and that's not necessarily going to be the case if you were to get your professional liability elsewhere. Okay, so we have chatted about the professional liability, the claims. So now what happens if you do have a claim? What are you supposed to do? So we are absolutely here to support you. So if none of this is retained, feel free to reach us and we can always assist. But what you should do is you should immediately report any potential or actual claim. So something important to highlight here is we also want you to report any potential claims. So that could be perhaps a patient has phoned you and said that they're going to be reporting a claim against you. So even if you haven't been formally presented with a complaint or claim, equally as important to notify us, because that can give the insurance company a head start. They can start a file for you so that even, if in a month from now it does lead to an actual complaint or claim, they've already got a head start. So you're going to immediately report that. You're going to formally document the incident, including details of anyone involved, immediately report any investigations or notice of complaints. So as Tara mentioned, you will know if you've been named in a complaint, if you've been formally named, because you will receive some kind of documentation from the regulatory body, or if it's a civil claim, it would be from a lawyer on behalf of their client. So there'd be some kind of email or letter officially naming you if you've been named in a complaint. So when reporting a complaint or claim, please include your certificate of insurance. So that is imperative to ensure you have the coverage. It includes the coverage dates of the policy as well to ensure you have the appropriate coverage and timeline, your contact information. So, this might seem silly, but it's important to ensure that it is a appropriate contact information. So an email that you check regularly, a phone number that's up to date, a phone number that ideally has the ability to leave voicemails. Something that we do hear from the adjusters and insurance companies is that they aren't able to leave a voicemail. So sometimes they'll contact us and say, hey, do you have another phone number? So when you're providing those details to us, please try to include a phone number that you check regularly and an email that's up to date. You're also going to want to include a copy of your claim. So that could be a demands letter, that could be a college complaint, lawsuit, some kind of documentation, and a brief overview of the complaint. And then lastly, any additional relevant documentation or information that could assist. Okay, so we've chatted about the key benefits of your policy through the CAOT program, and one of the most important elements is this pro bono legal advice. So you do have access, everybody who purchased the CAOT Professional Liability has access to this. So this is through Gallings. This is the preferred legal counsel through the CAOT Professional Liability Program. They specialize in all types of questions in regard to your practice. They're nationwide, so it doesn't matter which province you reside in. They will be able to assist kind of in that jurisdiction. So they can assist with key issues such as privacy and confidentiality, conflicts of interest, how to respond to requests for information from third parties, which we do see quite regularly. That's one of the most common types of reasons to use this service. Inquiries from your regulatory body, how to respond to a subpoena, professional misconduct questions, ethical obligations, and professional obligations. So the phone number is on your slide here. So 1-855-783-8825. But if you ever need to confirm this phone number again, feel free to reach out to us. So you are able to call them. It's a 30-minute time slot that you would have per issue. So if you happen to have multiple issues or inquiries that come up, you can use this service more than once. It's just important to note that it's one time per issue. So some other key benefits of having your own professional liability policy. So as Tara mentioned earlier, you could find yourself in a scenario where you are leaning on your employer's policy, perhaps if you're in a hospital setting, for example. But there are some key reasons why it might be in your own best interest to secure your own policy and not share that. So an employer's policy only responds to claims for that work done in that employment setting. So again, if you happen to work in multiple different employment settings, your coverage maybe that you have through employer A is not going to extend to the work that you do at employer B. Maybe missing some key coverage elements. So some of those key elements of coverage, like that retroactive date, perhaps they have a retroactive date on their policy. So their coverage is only going to go so far back. Perhaps it doesn't include extended reporting period coverage. So these are some key considerations as to why it could make sense to have your own coverage. May not offer coverage for claims based on prior services and or for claims that are made after the expiry. So again, those two key components, retroactive date, extended reporting period coverage, important to note, your employer's policy may not include those. And then lastly, you're likely going to share that policy limit with all employees of the entity. So if you happen to work for perhaps a larger employment setting and there happens to be like a mass claim where everybody for the organization is named all at once, and let's say there's a 5 million limit for that for everyone who works there, that limit could perhaps be reached and you may not have the coverage to respond. So then you would be paying out of pocket. So we don't want to find you in those kinds of scenarios. So it's important to consider having your own policy. So a few other examples of things you could avoid. You're working at multiple employment sites, as we've discussed. Claim is related to your volunteer activities. So if you have an opportunity to volunteer your services as an OT, your employer's coverage is likely not going to extend to those types of services and activities. You're working outside the scope of your employment or work. And then lastly, the claim is for a college complaint, a criminal charge based on past work, or is made after you retire. So again, just highlighting the importance of considering having your own coverage. Okay, so some actual examples and considerations highlighting this and why it's important to consider having your own coverage. An OT changes insurance policies after working for several years. 3 years later, she is sued by a client she treated while insured under her previous policy. Does she have coverage for this claim? The recommendation, check the policy wording. Does the policy have a retroactive date? So if that policy has a retroactive date, it would be key to see when that retroactive date is, because there is a chance that it may not go that far back. So our CAOT professional liability policy does not have that retroactive date, so there would be no concern if you had the CAOT policy. Another example, 2 years into retirement, an OT is sued by a client he had previously treated. Does he have coverage for this claim? Recommendation, check the policy wording. Does the policy have an extended reporting period? So ours has a 7-year extended reporting period. So if in this case, there would be coverage, but that's not guaranteed if you happen to have coverage elsewhere and there perhaps isn't an extended reporting period. All right, so we've had a chance to examine professional liability, claim scenarios, what to do if you have a complaint, the pro bono legal services, some key elements of your coverage. We'd like to now for you to consider your practice. Are you an employee? Are you an independent contractor? Are you a business owner? Are you maybe multiple of these? Perhaps you're an independent contractor and an employee. Let's examine some key scenarios where there are other coverages that may be designed for you. As an occupational therapist, you may lease or own a commercial office space, work in multiple employment settings, interact with clients in person or virtually, store and may be responsible for client information. Perhaps you have valuable contents, stock, and or professional equipment. Perhaps you employ or engage with staff, contractors, or volunteers. Do you fit into any of these? If you've answered yes, then we do have some other coverages that we offer through BMS. So now I want you to imagine some of these scenarios. You employ administrative and or professional staff and or you engage independent contractors, volunteers, or students, and they've alleged you of wrongful termination. There is no element of this coverage in your professional liability. This is where you would have to secure an additional coverage, which we offer, called employment practices liability. So if you're named in a wrongful termination claim, if you're named in a sexual harassment claim, discrimination, those types of employment allegations, you would want to ensure you're looking into employment practices liability. Another example, you have to close your business due to losses from water damage, fire, or vandalism. So as an OT, you're likely more so operating in person. So if you have that space that you're operating out of, perhaps you're a business owner or an independent contractor, you run your own business, and now there's a fire and it's damaged that space where you're interacting with your patients, you can't work there for a few weeks or maybe even months, and you're losing out on that revenue. You'd want to make sure you're securing what's called business interruption insurance, which we do offer via the office package. The office package would also include things like your contents coverage for your stock, your equipment, crime coverage, and that business interruption is key. Another example, I want you to imagine you experience an unexpected accident that impacts your ability to work. We offer what's called a 24-hour accident insurance designed for those who perhaps you don't have any other kind of coverage for accidents and you want to add something just in case you have an accident. Hopefully it would never happen, but unfortunately it does. We offer a 25,000 limit or a 50,000 limit, which you can secure via BMS for those accidents. So it's on a schedule of benefits. So it kind of depends what you would injure. Perhaps you've broken a leg, perhaps you've broken an arm, or you've had a more severe accident. The coverage is designed on a schedule of benefits and would kind of depend on that accident and the severity of which you would be paid. Lastly, can you imagine a hacker accesses your confidential files, your private client information, resulting in a privacy breach? This is something that we're unfortunately seeing more and more each day with kind of the hackers and the way that they unfortunately become more and more common these days. So we do offer a comprehensive cyber and privacy liability designed to assist you if you ever were to find yourself in this scenario, in some sort of breach. You've accidentally sent the wrong email to somebody with private client information. It would have a 24-hour breach response team that you can call and access as well. So what I like about this coverage is it's not just necessarily going to respond once you actually are named in a claim. It can also assist kind of in preventing, perhaps it even leading to a claim if you act on it appropriately and in a fast, efficient manner. So these are all the tailored insurance solutions that we offer to CAOT members. So that professional liability insurance, kind of the meat of our presentation today, you would be able to access this via the CAOT, administered through CAOT. You have the option between that 6 million limit and that 10 million limit. We also offer other types of coverages, such as commercial general liability. So if you have a patient that comes to see you, whether you're an employee, an independent contractor, or a business, that patient comes to see you and maybe they slip and fall while they're coming into the space. They break their arm and they're going to look to hold probably everyone responsible who they can. So they're likely going to name the treating professional, the landlord, and the business owner. So even if you're an employee, it's important to check with that employer to see if they have commercial general liability that would extend to you. If they don't, this is a key element of coverage to protect you from those third-party bodily injury claims and property damage. So if you rent a space, this is also key because if you were to accidentally damage that space and that landlord files a claim against you for property damage, you would want to have commercial general liability. We also offer clinic professional liability. So if you are an independent contractor or a business owner and you have that business thing other than your first and last name, you would want to consider adding this because what will often happen in a claim scenario is that patient is unhappy from the services that they got from you as an OT. They'll name you as an individual, but they'll also likely name your business. And that's where this clinic professional liability steps in. It's actually protecting the business. Your professional liability as an individual protects you, but if you have that business name, key coverage to consider. And then we also offer that multidisciplinary clinic professional liability. So as we know, you may not just be employing OTs. It could be, you know, other types of health professionals, physios, nurses, chiros. So if you do offer a multidisciplinary business, we also offer coverage for that business entity as well. We offer that cybersecurity and privacy liability, which we already chatted about. So again, that comprehensive 1 million limit for those, you know, breaches of privacy that could occur. Somebody hacks into your system, accesses private client information. This coverage is there to assist you. We also offer that employment practices liability. So if you engage with those students, independent contractors, employees, they don't just have to be employees. They can be independent contractors, students, volunteers. Important to consider if you're named in some kind of employment allegation. We also offer a legal service package. You might be saying, well, I have that pro bono legal service. Why would this be something I'd want to consider? So this is different. So this is something you would actually pay for, and you would have access to the phone number that you can call, but it doesn't have to be OT specific or practice specific questions. So that pro bono legal service has to be a little bit more geared to your practice and those examples that I went through on that slide, versus this one is through ARAG, so a separate organization, and you can call and speak to them about anything. So it could be OT related and practice specific, but it could also be more business specific, or you're planning on hiring someone and you want to access templates. They have drafted over 150 templates that you can access. You can also call and speak to them about anything. So it could even be something that's going on in your personal life. Maybe you're having a bit of an issue or a tiff with your neighbor, and you want to call and speak to a lawyer and see what you can do. You can call and speak to them about anything as many times as you'd like. So it's not limited to that one time per issue. We also offer legal expense insurance solutions. We offer a personal version of this and a business version of this. So what this is for are for those scenarios where you're perhaps not necessarily named in a claim, but you might need the services of a lawyer. Perhaps you've been audited by the CRA, which it's happened to me. I wish I could have accessed this service. So if you're audited in your personal life and you need to be able to have a lawyer or a professional accountant assist you in responding to the CRA, that's an element of coverage within this. So instead of paying, you know, hundreds of dollars for a lawyer, you'd be able to pay a reduced fee, one-time payment, and you would have coverage for that scenario. We also offer that 24-hour accident coverage. So for those sudden accidents that can impact your life that we've discussed, that schedule of benefits is there to assist you. We also now have the critical illness insurance. So this is a little bit different, where this would be for those things that can occur that are life-changing. You're diagnosed with cancer, heart attack, those types of illnesses. We now offer a lump sum payment if you were to be diagnosed. So if you have any questions about those coverages, feel free to let us know. We can assist you in getting them set up. And then lastly, we now also offer a family cyber. So we've discussed what can happen in your business if you know your privacy is breached, if you're hacked, but unfortunately that doesn't just stop in regard to your business. It can extend into your personal life as well. So if you have any children who are being cyberbullied, that's an element of coverage. Or if your identity is stolen, that's also an element of coverage. So if you want to learn more about any of these coverages, please feel free to reach out. We have now on the slide your dedicated CAOT phone number, your dedicated CAOT email to reach a dedicated broker here at BMS that is happy to review your unique practice circumstances. Something we very much understand is that no practice is really going to look the same. Everybody has different unique practice circumstances. So if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to reach out to myself or Tara, and we're happy to help. Thank you so much, everyone. I think we're going to open ourselves up to some questions. I don't see any in the chat. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
Yeah, feel free to pop them in. I know it's a lot of information at once, so you might not have a question now. So like Ashley mentioned, feel free to give us a call afterwards. We're happy to go through your practice circumstance or go through any questions that you might have on insurance in general. We'll leave a few minutes, I guess, for some more questions if anything comes through.
If anyone would prefer to ask their question verbally, just raise your hand and you can unmute for sure.
That's okay. I know it's a lot of information, so appreciate you
know,
might
it
need
is.
to digest it and then come back to it, which we can definitely help whenever those questions come up.
Or I feel like we chatted a lot. Maybe we answered everyone's question. That would be ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah, just feel free to reach out. If at any point, you have a question about hiring someone and what that would look like, or if things change, or you're renting a space or anything whatsoever, just let us know. We're here to help. Things can change and evolve throughout the year even. So where you start may not be where you end. You're always able to adjust coverage. Like that's a question I get a lot is, do I have to do everything all at once? Absolutely not. You can always add coverages as you grow and evolve.
Well, I still don't see any questions, so thank you both, Ashley and Tara. That was a great
Thank you.
presentation. You're right, information overload, but I think some really good information. So really thank you for your time and for doing the
Thank you.
presentation.
For sure. Thanks for
Thank
having
you
us.
all. Bye, everyone.
Have a great day.